Roma have sacked head coach Jose Mourinho after 3 years in charge with the club, ninth in Serie A. He guided Roma to their first trophy in 14 years when they lifted the Europa Conference League in 2022, and they lost the Europa League final on penalties to Sevilla last season. Now, in a brief statement, the club's owners, Dan and Ryan Friedkin, said this: "We will always have great memories of his tenure at Roma, but we believe that an immediate change is in the best interests of the club. We wish Jose and his assistants all the best in their future endeavours." OK, so that is the news. Mark, when did we find out, and when did Jose find out that he had been sacked?
This morning. He woke up this morning and was called into the training ground. Roma owners Dan and Ryan Friedkin summoned Jose Mourinho in person at the Trigoria training ground before the scheduled morning training session. Sky Italy understands that this was not a sudden decision. The owners told Mourinho about their decision, which was thought out and took into consideration the way the whole season had been going, and particularly the last month. The club's ownership believed that this is the right time to change direction, and Roma's training session this morning has been cancelled. The form doesn't make for good reading for a side hoping to get into the Champions League. 1 win in 5 in all competitions, beaten by Lazio last week in the Coppa Italia as well. You can see won just 13 out of 28 games there. And this is the current Serie A table. It doesn't look good either, because Roma down in 9th on 29 points. And obviously, like we say, this is a side that want to be challenging in the upper echelons of Serie A. They want to win the title. They've got a history of being in the Champions League as well. Doesn't look good at all. So, yeah, that is how things finish with Roma sacking Jose Mourinho today. The special one, the sacked one, once again.
I see what you did there. Gentlemen, let's come to you too, because it's always intriguing because Jose Mourinho was sent off in Roma's last home match a couple of weeks ago. He headed down the tunnel. The fans were actually singing his name. So it shows, you get the idea that maybe they're still supporting him. So why was that? And why didn't that have an impact on his future?
I think he's always had this kind of magnetism about him in Roma. I think they took to him very quickly. I think Jose Mourinho, you know, his kind of character in general, I think suits that Roma job. And I think he just always had a good relationship with the fans in that sense. He was always a big fighter on the pitch. You know, I think the memories as well of that first season, that Conference League win, getting to a European final last year as well, I think, you know, that did serve him in good stead. And to be fair, I think, you know, Roma are still only 5 points off the Champions League spots, which I think most fans probably see as the realistic ambition rather than a title, given just how strong a side like Inter Milan is at this moment in time. So I think he always had the fans on side. They are a deeply loyal fan base as well. So yeah, I think this is just a case of probably the fans' ambitions and the owners' ambitions not necessarily being kind of at the same level.
Yeah, I guess people remember Roma's standout signing, weren't they, in the summer, being Romelu Lukaku. He signed Dybala on a free last year as well. But was he backed enough in the transfer market at Roma to really compete at those lofty heights of even a Champions League spot?
Well, he was backed very heavily in the first summer of his arrival. They spent close to 100 million on transfers that summer. Post-pandemic as well, that was a really big layout for the club, for the new owners. The following years were more difficult for them in terms of spending. Obviously, that limited what they could do in order to comply with FFP, so they had to be creative. But they still managed to attract some top players, as you've mentioned. Lukaku, Dybala came in as well. I mean, these are players who the club probably wouldn't have been able to attract without Jose Mourinho there. So, you know, in many ways, it was a good marriage in that sense. You know, and certainly, as we mentioned, Jose Mourinho did have the love of the fans on his side as well. I mean, I think when he looks back on it, he will point to the lack of spending in those last two summer transfer windows, you know, on the back of that first summer. But over the course of his time there, I think he was back quite well, and the squad was pretty strong, albeit perhaps not as strong as he would have liked. You know, that to have signed players of Lukaku and Dybala's stature and some of the others they were able to bring in was quite good going given the circumstances. And obviously he brought them fantastic moments. I don't think you can overstate the significance of winning that Europa Conference League. You know, Roma's first European trophy in 61 years, their first trophy in 14 years. It was an immense achievement for the fans. And then to follow that up with a Europa League final as well, you know, this is significant stuff. You know, obviously the Serie A form was not at the same level, and that was a frustration. But I think he was able to achieve good things, but ultimately it's that league form that has cost him.
Yeah, I guess if critics of Jose Mourinho maybe would suggest, Mark, that he's now a manager from a different era, an older era, and doesn't fit in with modern football. Is that harsh? How do the stats stack up?
Manager of the past, Jose Mourinho. Put some respect on his name. 3 Premier League titles. Remember that press conference. But the magic, maybe, has it worn off? His win percentages are on the decline. In his days at Porto, Chelsea, Inter Milan and Real Madrid, his win percentage never dropped below 60%. And was as high as 72%, you can see there, at Real Madrid. But look how it drops from the start of his second spell at Stamford Bridge. 59% down to 58%. At Manchester United, 51%. We know that Tottenham, it didn't look great either, 51% there. And Roma, 49% in his most recent job. And you can see the titles there. Now he's got a very special silverware cabinet, hasn't he, in his home in London. From 2002 to 2015, 8 league titles, 7 domestic cups, 2 Champions League titles, UEFA Cup, Europa League as well, and of course you can see Conference League, which came at Roma, but it's the league titles, as the boys were suggesting there. Between 2016 and now, no league titles, just 1 domestic cup. Hasn't won the Champions League. We know he's had a little bit of success in the Europa Conference League there as well with Roma. So you can see the decline, some might say decline for Jose Mourinho, but the magic certainly doesn't feel like it's there. He still has the aura, he can still attract the big names. He's still box office, isn't he? When he walks into those press conference rooms, and any single interview you do and any game you're at, you have to watch the touchline when Jose Mourinho is down there, because he gives you everything and more. But where will his next job be, Rob? Going to be fascinating to see what happens. Yeah,
I would watch this space, I would think, is the answer to that one. It's understood the other half of the equation is that De Rossi is tipped to come in there, Roma's former captain, until the end of the season. So what next for Jose? Could we see a Premier League club being tempted by him, or does his time at Tottenham sound a toll for his Premier League ambitions?
Potentially, although this sacking maybe comes at slightly a good time for him. I don't see him coming to the Premier League this season, and even then there's no guarantee. But, you know, Newcastle have big ambitions and are not in the best of form at the moment. I personally back Eddie Howe to turn that form around, given his record at the club since he came in 2 seasons ago. But if those injuries come back and Newcastle are unable to rectify that form, then maybe they'll be looking for a more high-profile manager in the summer. Chelsea, Pochettino, yes. Has picked up some form of late, but it hasn't been an easy season. Has had to deal with a lot of turnover at that club, a squad full of players who, have barely played, with each other before this campaign. I've spoken to some Chelsea fans who would like Mourinho to come back to the club. I personally wouldn't be of that thinking. So there are some options there, but as we've alluded to, Mourinho, his results have declined in recent years, and you look at that Spurs job that he did. It did have its moments, but ultimately it was a failure. Manchester United, he won those 2 trophies in his first year, but ultimately a failure his last time at Chelsea as well. So yeah, I do feel like time is running out for Mourinho to stage a Premier League return.